Okay, all right. I'll get us started here. Welcome, everybody, to Can We Achieve a 1.5-Degree World? An exploration into the art and science of the possible. Mike Mellross is the Program Director of the Climate Innovation Fund at Alberta EcoTrust Foundation. Working in partnership with the City of Calgary and the City of Edmonton, the Climate Innovation Fund will initiate, support, and accelerate urban carbon reduction solutions in the two largest urban centres in Alberta. Mike has nearly a quarter century of experience in climate change, sustainability, and environmental management, working across the private, public, and charitable sectors. Mike is also a published author with articles in popular science journals on the application of market transformation theory for the achievement of climate change goals. Mr. Mellross has degrees in environmental science, water pollution studies, and natural sciences, and is a registered professional agrologist. Mike was recently a recipient of the Federation of Canadian Municipalities Best for Canada Innovator Award and a 2019 winner of the Charles Labatiuk Award for Environmental Excellence. So without further ado, please join me in giving a warm welcome to Mike Mellross today.
Thank you so much for that introduction, and I really do appreciate the opportunity to speak with this audience. I am a graduate of the U of A, so it's really exciting for me to come back and talk to some possible future graduates here. So before I really get started, I do just want to talk a little bit about setting the stage with respect to what I'm going to talk about. And really it's a combination of two things. One is data that I've been made aware of, or I've been part of creating and modeling over the years. And I'm linking that up with my individual experiences on many of the things that we talk about around climate change and just some of the observations that I've made. And I've synthesized that in 6 different concepts. So, so I'm sure everyone has heard about the Paris Agreement. The agreement sets a goal to limit the increase in global average temperature increase to well below 2 degrees Celsius. And that's below pre-industrial levels, and to strive to limit that increase to 1.5 degrees Celsius. 195 countries have signed on to this agreement, including Canada, and US has come back into the fold, which is great, as they're one of the larger emitters in the world. A special report was released in 2018 that indicated that that 2-degree goal that was outlined in the Paris Agreement may not be sufficient to avert the majority of the climate change impacts that we're forecasting. And that was over 200 scientists worked on that paper. It was published in 2018. And the City of Edmonton actually did some work around that particular report and took its lead from that as it's developing its new climate change strategy. So the report strongly recommended the globe strive for a maximum global average temperature increase of 1.5 degrees Celsius or lower in order to avert the worst of the climate change impacts. But is that even possible is the question. And I really want to unpack that and talk about it a little bit more. But I want to tell you, though, that climate change is a hoax. And maybe marinate on that for a second. And I think a lot of people's ears perked up there a little bit and said, no, who is this guy? I mean, he just said he worked in climate change for 25 years. And you probably, a visceral response occurs in you, one way or the other. Maybe there's some people in here that are, actually, maybe this thing is alarmist in some way. But really what I want to talk about in this talk is things like this. Climate change is a hoax. It simply isn't happening. The world's climate is relatively stable, and we have absolutely nothing to worry about. In fact, in the 70s, they thought that we were headed for an ice age, right? I think we've heard this before, right? These Time magazine covers are often put out there as the response to global warming. Well, didn't scientists think that we were going to freeze at some point? But really, aren't we measuring these global temperatures? And maybe if you can help me just have a dialogue with myself here for a second and just listen. Of course we measure temperatures. We have actual measurements of temperatures. And what we're seeing is that there is a departure from the average with respect to global average temperatures. And this is in the land, and this is also in the oceans, with actual data. And the other thing that we see with this data is that it's consistently measured. And since we have been measuring it, it's scientifically defensible. There's a trend here. And those articles from the 70s, when you actually unpack the conversation a little bit further and you scratch the surface, you see that the vast majority of the scientific community was suggesting that global warming was going to be the issue that we're tackling, not a coming ice age. So what I really meant then when I said that climate change is a hoax is that it's all natural. It's the sun that's causing climate change. In fact, humans really have nothing to do with it. So again, we don't need to really do anything. We just adapt to it, just like we adapt to many different things in society. Even the COVID crisis, we've started to adapt. We're working through things. This is an actual billboard that was put up in Edmonton by the Friends of Science during the first ever IPCC and Cities Climate Conference in Edmonton in 2018. And it is seeding doubt and seeding uncertainty, thinking that there isn't a general agreement on the science here. But aren't we seeing significant increase in greenhouse gases? And don't we know a lot about the greenhouse gas effect? Isn't this science that's been around for forever? Like we understand that tomatoes grow better in a greenhouse. We understand that. We do that as a society. We've adopted that practice, and we know that it's warmer in the greenhouse than it is outside of the greenhouse. And we know the scientific principles behind that. So we're clearly seeing accelerated greenhouse gas emissions entering into the atmosphere since the Industrial Revolution, since we started to combust fossil fuels for the purposes of doing work for us. And really, when you talk about the various forcings, the things that are leading to global warming and climate change, we actually can tease out those things. We can determine what component is the sun and what component is anthropogenic sources, and what is the primary forcing, or the driving forcing is what they call it. And it's very clear when it comes to the sun's impact on climate. It's very much cyclical. It's measurable. It's understandable. We see the trend. We can go back in time and we can see how it looks. And that's one of the lines on this one. It's the one that's sort of curved off to along the zero line there. And the red line is the greenhouse gases. And we know that through observations, we see that greenhouse gases lead to temperature increases in the climate. And leads to a different climate. We're moving towards a climate. Separating weather from climate, we're trending to a different climatic condition. But what I really want to talk about, though, I'm sort of unpacking this dialogue, is that this is the evolving conversation. What we're really seeing is that we're moving from this idea of denying this science, because it really can't be denied anymore. There is so much evidence to suggest that this is happening, but we're moving towards a world where we're seeing acceptance of the general science for what it is. It is happening. Climate change isn't a hoax, and you'll rarely find somebody who says that climate change isn't happening, and you'll rarely find anybody that says a large component of that climate change is driven by anthropogenic sources of emissions. So I think you see where I'm going with this, but there's an evolution in the conversation, and what was once denialism has what now become what I would call delayism, and it's become a conversation not about do we need to do something, but how we do it and how fast we do it and how much we spend on it. So how much money in society will we allocate to this issue? This is the era of climate delayism, actually. And the even more challenging part of climate delayism is that most people that are doing this are not consciously aware that that is what they're doing. Mostly everyone, all decision makers really have the best of intentions. They really want us to, move forward towards a utopic society. I mean, that's what we're trying to do. But how we get there is always the question that is tackled. So I want to show you a few things that I've noticed and observed and measured over the last 25 years working in this space. And I really define it as a really significant yeah, but problem. We often say things like, yeah, I understand this, it has to be done, but we don't have access to this kind of money. This takes a huge amount of money to make this change. And really what we're saying is we're not willing to allocate money to it as a society. You've decided to spend it in some other way. And then there's a yeah, but there isn't enough energy and climate literacy to make change acceptable in civil society. Really, does everybody need to know how to build a bridge in order for us to walk across it? That's the argument that's being made there. And another yeah, but is that, it's logistically impossible. We don't have enough time. We don't have enough smarts. We just can't do this. Things move though in my world, and when I've worked in government and even the work that I do today, it moves at the speed of attention. And we can move mountains with focus. We just created a 10-year vaccine in 10 months. And not only did we do one of them, there's multiple vaccines for COVID. And we can do amazing things when humanity puts their mind to it. It's about focus. It's about allocating resources. So I often do this myself. I catch myself all the time on the yeah, but conversation. But what I do is I try to pay attention to that. And this is where my 6 concepts in this presentation have come from, is my observations on this sort of yeah, but conversation and the question of can we even really do this? So we can use science and we can use evidence, but really the numbers and the logic are not enough. We have to be artful in the conversation. We need to be multidisciplinary, collaborative, generative, and we need to really, really address this for what it is. It's the long emergency we're in. It's not an acute issue that comes up like COVID-19. It's a long emergency, and it makes it very difficult from a psychological perspective to put a significant amount of time and resources to it. So I do want to start the conversation, though, on the most difficult to wrap your brain around with respect to data. And it's the most data heavy part, and it gets sort of like easier as we move along. So to highlight the scale and the rapidity of change, it's really easy to talk about housing as a concept. So I'll often go back to the residential sector because we all live in homes and we understand that best, and that helps elucidate the scale a little bit. So the transformation required in the next 30 years is absolutely monumental. But guess what? The next 10 years is astronomical. The city of Edmonton has done some very interesting bleeding edge work, I would call it, on establishing something called a local carbon budget. And utilizing this carbon budget really highlights the urgency of climate change. The world has a finite global carbon budget. Essentially, only so much can be emitted into the atmosphere if we are to keep global warming under that 1.5 degrees Celsius. It's derived from the years of measurements and observations of the temperature increase that occurs as a result of the certain concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere. So it's well understood science, and we're applying it now in terms of how does that look in a local context. Edmonton has used a model to localize this budget. It puts forward 135 megatons of carbon dioxide that Edmonton is left if it is to limit its contribution to global climate change in alignment with this global target. So this number is very, very troubling and problematic because it is how much we have left for all intents and purposes forever, unless we aggressively implement negative emissions technologies, which is, again, bleeding edges kind of things, nature-based solutions, sequestration of carbon, direct removal of carbon from the atmosphere. They're all possible, but they're definitely in their infancy. If you look at Edmonton's current emissions, about 17 megatons per person, this local carbon budget suggests we need to decrease that per capita emissions to 3 megatons per person by 2030 and achieve carbon neutrality by 2050. If Edmonton did nothing, they would blow through this carbon budget within 8 years. So we're talking about, when people say that 10-year time frame, I think a lot of you have heard that 10-year time frame. This is where it comes from, is we have about 10 years to turn this giant ship. Is it even possible? So Edmonton did go a step further, and they asked that important question. And with today's technology and known reduction strategies, it is possible. The answer is yes, but it will take unprecedented focus. Just to give you an idea, again, relying on the residential sector as our basis in reality, Edmonton has about 370,000 dwelling units. That's single family homes. You might live in an apartment, a multifamily home as well, or a townhome, all of those things. This modeling suggests we will, at a minimum, need to reduce the thermal and electrical loads in these existing structures by 50% by 2050. And that's at an average cost. And many people argue this is on the low side of about $65,000 per dwelling unit. So this really hits home, so to speak, because that would mean starting right now, we need to retrofit 20,000 dwelling units a year to this standard. And each year we don't do that, we need to add that to the subsequent years. So this would be well above and beyond the renovation rate, which is about 1 to 2% of the residential stock right now each year. And well beyond any energy performance goals that are done in those typical renovations as well. So it's a paradigm shift here. This is a big shift in how we look at things. And on top of this, we keep adding new homes that are not carbon neutral. And every time we build a new house right now that isn't achieving carbon neutrality, that goes on the retrofit list. So it becomes one of those 20,000 plus dwellings every year we need to retrofit. So it's an absolutely huge undertaking. It requires this paradigm shift. I like to point out this quote by Bill McGibbon, though, when you talk about climate change, winning slowly is the same as losing. We need to get moving now, and we need to turn this ship faster than we are right now. The second concept I want to highlight is that of the practitioner conundrum. And I'm torn on this one because I am a sustainability practitioner and I have been for quite some time. I think it's a growing field. But again, these are my observations, and creation of the sustainability practitioner position has both benefits and continues to present challenges. This is my experience as a sustainability practitioner through the years. My experience is that I'm like a kid in a candy or outside the candy store or outside the toy store. I'm looking through that window. I love what I see. There's so much opportunity for me to play with the toys or eat the candy, but the door is locked, or there's very limited hours to this store for me. I can only play with certain toys, and I can only modify them once in a while to maximize my fun. And this is, again, the challenge that we have with climate change, is because climate change isn't something that you do off the side of your desk. You don't solve that off the side of your desk. It's about core business. It's about changing the way that we do things. We need to transform our economy. We need to transform the way that we do business. We need to transform lifestyles. So the minute you're outside of that core business, or you're perceived to be outside of that core business, it becomes a challenge. So really what it means is that we need to make the low carbon pathway the only pathway. So when we talk about a fork in the road, there is no fork in the road. It is just straightforward. Everything that we do going forward today in business, in life, is the low carbon pathway. How do we get to that point that this is the default? This isn't something that we choose to do. This is something that is. This is just the way that we work from now going forward. So a monumental task again, but when you're on the outside of that as a sustainability practitioner, it can be very frustrating in that you're not necessarily influencing core business all the time. That is changing though. When we talk about integration of things like environmental, social, and governance criteria into investing, there's also sustainable development goals that many corporations are taking into their business planning processes. So I am hopeful that we're getting to a point with the sustainability practitioner that you're invited into the toy store. It is happening. So that's why I said I'm of two minds of this particular concept. Still a bit challenging. There's no such thing as a sustainability overlay. There's only doing the sustainable thing. It's not doing what you want to do and then adding sustainability principles later. It just doesn't work that way. The next concept is that of the prioritization delusion, I call it. It's an immense challenge. It's very counter to how we do things in society. We usually like to say, ask and really answer the question, tell me what is my biggest bang for the buck? Everyone is looking for the silver bullet. Everyone's looking for the easiest, lowest cost thing, low hanging fruit. What do I get started on? What do I do right now to help get me there? And then other things will come in at a later time. But again, over and over again, what we're seeing is that everything within our society is underpinned by carbon and by climate change. It is literally everything that we do. It's the lifestyles that we live. It's the businesses that we operate. It is all things and decisions that you make have a climate change repercussion, sometimes positive, but often negative as well, particularly if it's connected to a conventional energy use. There is challenges with looking for the silver bullet. Unfortunately, because of inaction in the past, really, we are left with doing a lot of these things concurrently and not sequentially. And there's a lot of interrelation between these things as well. You can't necessarily bring in just renewable energy if you don't also address energy efficiency to get it down to a level where renewable energy will be able to supply the energy demands of that particular home or building or whatever you're working on. There's an interdependence of these things. If we don't work across the sectors and the actions simultaneously, we actually have no hope of achieving these deep emissions reductions targets. So to oversimplify it though, we cannot achieve net zero buildings if we don't work on energy efficiency and renewable energy at the same time. You know, this of course doesn't mean that we can't phase and stage things in, but that time frame to staging in these things is very, very short now. It's like year one, you're doing this, year two, you're doing something else, year three, you're doing that. Instead of saying, you know, for the first 5-6 years, I'm going to do this one thing, I'm going to pilot things. We don't have that luxury anymore. We really need to start working in a holistic, systematic manner. We need to look at things as a system now and solve multiple wicked problems at once. It can't be talking about carbon reductions without also talking about how do we improve social housing. Like these things work together as one. They need to marry up. You need to solve these things together. As I mentioned previously, the low carbon pathway is the only pathway, and we need to start thinking about how we get there. This concept is about the distributed decision maker. You know, sometimes you wish secretly that there was a benevolent dictator that was just making all of the decisions for us and moving the economy around and saying, I know what's best and I'm going to do all of these things and we're going to achieve utopia in 30 years. Well, a benevolent dictator doesn't exist, and I don't think we'd want to live in that world anyway. We want to have our freedoms. We want to have a capitalist society. I mean, we do have a market economy here. And what that really results in, though, is that there are a lot of decisions being made by a lot of different actors in society. And it really comes down to the concept of utility and really understanding that a little bit better. And many of you are probably in economics and have taken some of this, this theory or this work on utility. So in that wedge diagram I showed you, there were about 30 different groups of actions that can be taken to reduce emissions. Within each of those wedges, there's a complex interaction of decision makers, from the individual building owner to the government policymaker. These decision makers all must come to similar conclusions and take action if the aggregated outcomes are to be achieved. So, you may have heard things like, for every dollar spent on energy efficiency, you get a knock-on economic impact of some kind. So 3 additional dollars of economic activity. Those are other people coming in on this decision other than public dollars. So they're spending money on it too. So they think it's a good idea in some way. For that to actually occur, though, these people need to derive satisfaction from this investment. And it is really important to note that individuals, as much as economists want them to be, are really not perfect financial beings. We don't make decisions based solely on financial analysis. In fact, rarely we do that. The concept of utility doesn't just include financial benefit. It really talks about enjoyment, happiness, satisfaction, and not just that financial gain. So many investments focused on emissions reductions have a very marginal financial payback. It's not a driver in itself. And that's very, very challenging, because then you need to look for other components of utility. Why is this decision being made by somebody? Why are you going to spend money on this? A big screen TV or something, you get immediate enjoyment out of that. Granite countertops or quartz granite tops, they're beautiful. Every day you wake up, you're like, I'm so glad I made this purchase. But when it comes to something like hidden, like energy efficiency, insulation in your walls, it's really not very sexy. And although you may have some comfort utility out of it, in general, it's very hard to create a straight line from the decision to this maximizing someone's total utility. So really, these financial paybacks are marginal, as I said, and we need to look for other ways where utility is going to increase for people, and it's a bit challenging right now. So this is a quote that I often use. I'm so excited. I want to do a home energy efficiency improvement renovation. Said no one ever. Most people work in the realm of on the renovations is I want an aesthetic improvement, or I want to increase my asset value by improving the kitchen or that kind of thing. So energy efficiency is not really valued in the market in the same way. So a paradigm shift is required. We need to assume that there really is low utility with these decisions. You don't really receive a lot of satisfaction as a homeowner when you do these things. I'm focusing in on homeowners. A lot of this does hold true with businesses as well, and other people that are making these decisions. There tends to be a better financial case for those agents or actors in the market. But there still comes down to, are they getting certain satisfaction of it? Often is a bit more financially driven with those players than with residential decision makers. And we need to assume there's marginal business cases. I mean, energy is fairly inexpensive. You'll hear lots of people arguing otherwise on that, but in general it is. So the investment is not compelling enough in itself to drive you to do it. So what I've arrived at is that you need to support all of these other tools with a clear imperative, and you create that through regulation, good policy. And really we need to talk about a little bit more about socializing these costs for the common good. The next item I'll get into with respect to concepts is something that is frustrated me for many years now, and it's a fallback position of a lot of governments and a lot of even educational agencies, and I refer to it as the individual blame game. And perhaps some of you remember this. It was in the early 2000s, the federal government came out with something called the 1-ton challenge. And it basically said, look hard at yourself and the way that you do things and take some action so that you can reduce 1 ton of emissions in your lifestyle. Edmonton has a similar program right now called Change for Climate. It gives you ideas on what you can do to change your life, things you can take with respect to individual actions and reduce your own individual carbon footprint. And I would argue, and people debate me on this quite frequently, so you can certainly disagree. I don't claim to have all the answers here or be a guru. I'm just sharing with you some opinions and some things I've observed. I call this victim blaming. And the reason I call it that is that you cannot ask people to sustain lifestyle changes every day for the rest of their lives without an accompanying institutional change. These types of things cannot be sustained on a regular basis unless you have, unless you are ultimately so dedicated and an altruistic individual, which is very few in our society. It's just a very challenging thing to do. So my response to this is you take the choice out of it. So it's very difficult to make a responsible decision in an irresponsible society. We need to accompany these decisions that people are making so that they really aren't decisions anymore. The default, as I've said in the past few slides, is the low carbon pathway. So when I turn on those lights, I want to make sure that there's the government policy set out that's just renewable energy for me. I don't want to have to make a decision between buying that renewable energy or buying a carbon-based energy source. I feel we need to move the entire market, and we do that through good policy and regulation. Otherwise, we will only be landing on the 10% of people where these educational campaigns really resonate with. And of course, I don't say live a wasteful lifestyle or don't be conserving and don't have a stewardship ethic. Absolutely, we all should still live lives like that and understand that we have individual impact. But to rely on this as being a change mechanism that's going to result in scale change, I think is somewhat delusional. And I think the sooner we move on from it, the sooner we'll be able to tackle the problem in a different way and in a way that's going to actually affect change. So the final concept I'm going to talk about gets a little bit more into the data side again. And it's really a growing problem with respect to measuring our impacts and ensuring that we are taking impactful action as a society on climate change. And it's called, I'm calling it the hidden elephant. And the hidden elephant is this concept of embodied carbon. And there's really two angles to it. There's the embodied carbon itself, which is not well understood. We're starting to work on this, though, for sure. And then there is the problem with the measurement of material flows of carbon. So it's a bit technical, but it's about really understanding ownership and chain of custody on the carbon that's associated with all of our goods, services, materials, products, all of those things, so that we can understand who will be best positioned in the marketplace to take action to reduce that carbon. So what is embodied carbon? Embodied carbon is the sum of all the carbon required to produce any goods and services. So when you make something, you use energy, and often this energy has a carbon intensity. You also at times use other sources of carbon that are incorporated into a product, you know, cement and wood and bricks, things like that. There's certain components that have, you know, carbon-based materials in it, but also, of course, the energy used to produce that. So this type of carbon is infrequently, or at best inconsistently, measured and accounted for. at least in a holistic sense. There is some work being done, and the building sector is very good at leading things, and they're doing a lot of work on this with third-party systems like LEED driving it, and this understanding that sometimes the greenest building is the one that you don't build at all, and you reuse or adapt a current structure. And the philosophy behind someone saying that is that we're avoiding new material production and we're maximizing the embodied carbon within that existing structure. The other issue that we have is the material flows issue. And this is again bleeding edge. And I have to commend the city of Edmonton. They are working on these kinds of things a lot. You live in a very progressive city if you're currently from Edmonton right now. They have been working on something called a consumption-based inventory. They put one out in 2019. And this graph shows the difference between a consumption-based inventory, which is on the left, and the current mode of inventorying around the world, which is the kind of inventorying on the right here in this graph, the production-based inventory, that's used to inform whether or not nations are achieving their Paris Agreement targets. So it's the production inventory side that's mostly utilized for that. A consumption-based inventory accounts for these material flows of carbon. So for instance, it tries to assign the carbon footprint of the product to the end use of that product rather than upstream of that particular product. It is thought to better allocate and assign the responsibility of the carbon footprint to the product or service that's being utilized by the society or the actor within society. So in Edmonton's case, the consumption-based inventory increases the average Edmontonian's carbon footprint by about 30%. And that's not atypical. Vancouver, when they did this, doubled their carbon footprint. So it really better accounts for how much you really are using with respect to carbon, or how much you're producing. The bottom line is that we're not fully accounting for the total carbon footprint around the globe or at the local level. And this is problematic, of course. And it seems like it's somewhat academic, but it has real implications in terms of setting goals and taking action. And this is particularly true as we look at things like drawdown, which is getting a lot of play recently, Project Drawdown, and the things that we should be doing in order to achieve huge swings in carbon reduction. We simply just don't measure enough of this in order to ensure that we're properly accounting for taking action on this. And what that really does is limits allocation of capital to these things. And they're very important things. I don't disagree with what Drawdown is suggesting are the top 10 things. When you look at the red underlined ones here, these ones are very problematic from a carbon measurement perspective and accounting at a nation level. But I don't disagree with these being very impactful from an emissions reduction. So we need to measure up or marry up the measurement and the accounting of the carbon reduction with some of these things that we know through other analysis really do result in massive carbon reductions. So it's a huge challenge. Edmonton is tackling it. I think it's starting to get into the consciousness, and I'm optimistic that we are going to get there. So bottom line, as I wrap up, and then I think I'm going to have some time for some questions, but can we achieve a 1.5 degree world? I absolutely think we can do it. I think we can do a lot in the next 10 years, but it's going to require a monumental, unprecedented amount of focus. And we need to do some paradigm shifting. We need to really look at some of these things that we've taken for granted, like I've presented today, and tease them out and say, we need to do some things very differently here. So the real question is, will we do this? And I look to the audience here to contemplate this. I want you to think about this. I want to think how you look at as you move forward in your careers. I can't answer this question. I, of course, have an opinion, but I think that everybody needs to ask and answer this question and really look to the next steps here and how we all can be part of those next steps with respect to tackling this long emergency. So if there's any questions, I'm going to try to pull up that Q&A. If you want to follow me, I do have a Twitter account. I'm not overly active on Twitter, but it's at Mike Edmonton. I'm fairly active on LinkedIn, so you can find me on LinkedIn quite easily by just searching out my name. Okay, there is no denying that Canada is taking big steps in tackling climate change, global warming. My question revolves around how we could potentially influence other countries who have large carbon footprints, such as China. That seems quite unregulated. I'm not sure if I 100% agree with that. I believe China's taking some significant actions. If you, again, look past the surface, I mean, they have a massive population, of course, and they are trying to move up everybody there to a higher quality of life. When I talked about the carbon budget and the local carbon budget, it actually utilizes something called a convergence and contraction model. And that allows some nations and municipalities, like those within China, to come up with respect to their per capita emissions, while developed, richer nations need to rapidly come down. And this is a bit of the fairness thing that suggests that, there is a certain amount of energy that's required to get everybody to a quality of life that is reasonable. And so that's built right into that local carbon budget model. And I think when you look at countries like China, yes, they are large emitters, but you can't just say, if China would just emit or just emit less, then, Canada needs to do less, or the US needs to do less, or whatever. It's that 1% problem. We're all a little sliver. It's that wedge diagram, but across nations. Everybody needs to take their part. You can't just say, we'll let the other guy do it, because everybody's only doing 1 to 3%. Okay, hi, Mike. We have a municipal election coming up soon. What questions should we be asking candidates selection cycle? These issues to really figure out who is on board with these actions. Great question. I would ask them, really, I would focus in on the urban environment. What are you doing to maximize infill, increase density? What are you doing to increase mode share of public transit, of active transportation? These big city building things are critical for us to tackle. They're a big part of the wedge approach to reducing emissions. And if candidates don't have good questions or good answers to those kind of questions, I would definitely challenge them with respect to their climate change agenda. I think one more in the chat. I see, how can individuals aspiring to be a part of leadership opportunities with environmental programs and our initiatives? What are some examples to get involved with? I think there's some volunteer opportunities, even with organizations like mine at times with our eco gathering. But again, in the pandemic, that might be a little bit hard. I'd also encourage you to look at a website, Eco Canada. They often have ways to get into the environmental industry. They have programs that support internships and also other volunteer opportunities there. Probably running out of time, so I'll end it there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, thank you so much, Mike, for your session. We really appreciate all the work you've put into the presentation. I actually personally have one question to ask you. I think we have 4 minutes left, so maybe you can answer it quickly, but is there any way that companies can help work to retrofit their own buildings to become carbon neutral in the future? Like if they want to take the initiative, are there any programs in place that the city of Edmonton has?
Yeah, actually, the city of Edmonton has a couple programs right now that I'm aware of. One's called BIRA, one's called HERA. Maybe not the best marketing names, but Building Energy Retrofit Accelerator Program. And that's for large buildings right now. And they do provide a incentive to take on energy conservation measures that helps reduce the capital costs of that. There's an equivalent home program as well, the Home Energy Retrofit Accelerator Program, where you get an energy efficiency rebate for doing new windows or installing insulation, that kind of thing. At the provincial level, the Emissions Reduction Alberta is offering a program called the Business Savings Program, which also provides incentives for retrofitting large buildings. The federal government is also considering a residential program that should be coming out soon, which is up to $5,000 rebate for home energy efficiency.
That's awesome. Thank you. Pretty important stuff. Yeah, I personally enjoyed the entire presentation. I feel like it's really important to talk about climate change and teach people these topics, because we'll all be really impacted in the future. So thanks again. Let's give a virtual applause to Mike. Thank you so much again.